Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Shafi Musaddiq. I'm the news editor for Alliance magazine. Apologies for our delayed start. We've been having some connection issues on our end, so thank you for holding on. I'm incredibly excited to bring today's webinar to you, exploring the essence of philanthropy in Asia in partnership with Myriad Alliance. And as you can see, we're having some connection issues with Dickson, so we'll hopefully smooth that on the back of our end. So if you're hearing noise, please don't worry. So today we'll discuss why and how private philanthropy is booming in Asia, where cross-border philanthropy and how to build partnerships between local charitable projects and overseas funders. But before we delve into the discussion, I'm just going to run through a few housekeeping rules for everybody to know about. So there are two ways that you can get involved in the audience. Firstly, feel free to introduce yourself using the chat function on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You should be able to see a small speech bubble, and you can use this chat if you're having any issues with your audio or video. We have a team behind the scenes ready to help you if you need it. You can also put questions to our panelists at any time using the Slido Q&A on the right-hand side of your screen. As well as asking your own, you'll be able to upvote other people's questions if you'd like to see that question's asked. We'll also be keeping an eye out throughout the webinar, and I'll have questions put to our panelists at the end during our Q&A. And should you need to, you have captions. That's on the bottom left-hand side of the screen where you see a CC button. This allows for closed caption in English and several other languages. We encourage you to use this if you need it. So we have three fantastic speakers for you today. Our first speaker is Anita Toy. She's the Executive Director of Myriad Australia, a non-profit based in Melbourne that serves as a strategic partner and ally for private philanthropy in Australia. Her organisation offers services for Australian individuals, corporates, and not-for-profits that also bring the expertise and global networks of Myriad Alliance. Myriad Australia provides donors with simple and efficient solutions to support non-profit initiatives around the world. Secondly, we have Dickson Lim. He's the head of Temasek Trust Foundation Advisors, the independent professional philanthropy services advisory arm of Temasek Trust. His organization provides specialist philanthropy advisory and management services to foundations, family offices, philanthropists, and charities. And then finally, we have Xing, the China CEO for Give to Asia, an international charity network which strengthens communities in Asia by making cross-border giving easier and more effective. Give to Asia believes local communities know what's best for their most pressing needs and how to address them. So I'm going to go straight to getting to know a bit more of our panelists before we go have a conversation. So first, I'm going to start with Anita. Anita, giving in Australia appears to be largely domestic. Could you take us back to a particular moment when cross-border giving really took off in Asia, in Australia, sorry?
Yes, Shafi, that's true. So in the past, the Aussie government placed many barriers in the way of international giving, and they included a strict in-country requirement where tax-deductible donations must be applied to Australian charities if their purpose, including their beneficiaries, were in Australia. And at that particular time, the only way to support an overseas cause was through the INGOs, which were delivering humanitarian aid and relief. So you can probably see that it made it really challenging for Australian donors who wanted to support their chosen cause overseas, particularly in the countries they cared about, because it often fell outside the scope of those larger NGOs. So Fortunate for us, the after some advocacy efforts, regulatory changes in 2017 um, allowed some of the restrictions to start relaxing. So they removed the in-country requirements, which allowed tax-deductible donations to flow freely outside the country. But there's a caveat on this, and that the condition for those donations that flow outside of Australia must be flowed through an Australian charity, which was registered as a public benevolent institution, and that the funds must be applied to projects or organisations that focus on poverty alleviation. So it was a bit of a game changer in 2017 because the doors started to creak open, which meant that one, the Aussie donors could support charitable initiatives outside the country and claim 100% tax deduction. But two, it allowed overseas charities to start fundraising in Australia. So while the gateways started to open in 2017, it really only took off about 5 years ago that cross border giving started to really gain momentum. It was probably really when COVID hit was a turning point because it shifted a lot of the mindsets for Australian donors to look beyond our borders as more people and communities were affected by conflict, extreme climate events, and disease outbreaks. So, really, only in the last 5 years.
Thank you, Anita. And we'll discuss more, we'll pull apart how that has evolved since COVID. But next, I will turn to Dickson. Dickson, thank you so much for joining us. Singapore has become one of Asia's growing philanthropic epicenters. Could you briefly paint the nuances of Singaporean cross-border giving as it currently is and where it has come from on its journey?
Thank you for having me. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Singapore has gone through quite a bit of transformation. It started off by the government giving a very generous tax deductible percentage of 250%. So it means for every $100, you get $250 in taxable tax deductible, and that is a huge incentive that is really out of this world. But the condition for that was to restrict the use of tax deducted funds to only in Singapore. So that has remained till today the biggest limitation. While you can enjoy extremely generous tax benefits, it is restricted to Singapore. Anything that goes out of Singapore, there is no tax deduction. Recently, it has released something of a bonus that finally the government has given some concession to that, but it is still a first phase applicable to only single family offices. So for single family offices fulfilling certain criteria, then it gets dollar for dollar tax deductible. That is still today the only scheme that is available. So that's tax deduction. But since then, we have also allowed, under Singapore's ambition to be the philanthropic hub of Asia, to allow innovation in other areas. And one of the innovative aspect is to allow donor advised funds in Singapore without tax deduction, so specifically without tax deduction, to invest. So these funds can invest in social enterprises with any returns returning back to the fund. So that is at least one clear sign of advancement in innovation, and the country will continue to look at how to innovate further to enable an ecosystem that is friendly and generous to the donor community.
Thank you, Dickson. That's really, really helpful to just paint the picture as a starting point. Next, Li Xing. Li Xing, China's private philanthropy sector has grown significantly in recent years through cross-border giving, but cross-border giving generally still represents only a fraction of the total domestic giving. How is the infrastructure in China changing to facilitate growth in cross-border giving both ways?
Okay. I think thank you for having me first, Shafi. I think I would like to talk about the cross-border, which means that in China, the Chinese donors giving out to overseas projects. So this part, I think China is now getting some sort of progress recently. One is that we are now seeing more ONGOs, not ONGOs, the non-profits registered in China. There is now currently around 15,000 non-profits registered compared to 2018, which is like 189% increase. And so that gives us, and this kind of registration, including some foundations set up in the name of the the families. Second, I think we are now seeing more policy support, and then which we can see from the recently revised charity law in China that specifies that the state encourages the overseas donations by the Chinese donors. And then also we are now seeing that in the ruling parties specifically specifies that the party is also encouraging the Chinese giving abroad to show the China's kind of kindness to the outside world. But I want to emphasize that there is one point which is actually a special kind of case in China, that we are now seeing the internet fundraising platform getting more and more these kind of donations from the public, and especially from the individuals, people, through this kind of internet platform, such as the Temasek 99 charity day fundraising platform. Why it's emphasized is because that now individual Chinese can actually use that platform to make the donations to the overseas projects through that kind of platform. So they don't need, because China has very severe or very strict kind of a foreign exchange control. So you're not allowed actually to make the transfer to outside world without kind of approval. And so we don't have much kind of a foreign currencies available on our account as well. So when you make the donation, if you do it by yourself, there is no way to go to do that. But now Tencent, such kind of platform, is not offering that kind of channel. That if you make the donation in RMB, which is the Chinese currency, then Tencent can transfer that into the currencies that will be used in that country, from that country. And then Tencent will transfer that money into the grantees in that specific country. With this, I think there will be more and more Chinese individuals making donations to the outside world. So this is kind of a new phenomenon actually happening in China. Although that I guess that the amount which is not released, I guess that is not very big, but at least that the platform is now available, and then people are making donations to these overseas platforms. So I think this is a good sign. The second part that I would like to talk about is actually the overseas donations inside China. So for this part, I think it is now under the governance of the Chinese overseas angel law, which is governing the overseas donations into China. For this part, I think this law came into effect in 2017. Ever since that, I think all of the angels' activities inside China has been under this kind of monitoring and control system. And for Gift Asia, our main business is on this part. And initially, we feel not so used to that, but now I think we are now getting more experience on that. The main thing is that every project, every single money would need to go through China, which if the fund is coming from an overseas angel or foreign angel. And I think, and then especially as a foreign NGO, if we want to do that project in China, then you need to go through a registered overseas angel representative office in China, which now Gift Asia has that kind of license. And ever since 2017, we have helped quite a lot of overseas donors to do this kind of cross-border giving in China. And I think I will stop here and I'll give more kind of examples on how to do that kind of a cross-border giving if we have time. Back to you, Shafi.
Thank you, Li Xing. That's super helpful to paint that picture. Just a reminder to our audience, as you think of questions, please do put them in the Slido Q&A box to your right-hand side, and we'll be doing our best to get through as many of them towards the end. I just want to open the floor now to all our panelists, and one key aspect is the diversity of Asian diaspora, and that is significantly shifting not just cross-border giving financially, but the cross-cultural exchange where perhaps second or third generations from elsewhere bring their expertise back. How is the role of diaspora shifting philanthropy where you are? I'll start with Anita.
Daffy, Australia is proudly a multicultural nation, and of 8.6 million in our population, 31.5% of our population were born overseas, and half have at least one parent born abroad. So that diversity gives Australia a really strong connection to other countries, particularly in Asia, with China and India by far is our fastest growing community here. And we all know how generous and philanthropic the diaspora community is because it's deeply embedded in their cultural traditions. And what we've really seen in Australia, particularly in the last year alone, is that our diaspora community sent $40 billion in remittances abroad. So that number alone is 10 times larger than the Australian federal aid budget, which is $4 billion, and more than double the charitable giving in the country, which is 18.6 billion. So it's really India, China, and Vietnam leading the way in being the biggest contributors. So I think that really highlights the power of collective giving and homeland philanthropy happening in Australia. Going back to your question, Shafi, regarding the second and third generation, we are starting to see the emergence of these new generations, particularly because one, they've made their own wealth. Second, they're in line to inherit, probably the biggest intergenerational wealth transfer in history. And we know that with this second generation, they're already globally minded, they're global givers, and they want to pay homage to their homeland. However, what's really interesting in Australia is I mentioned earlier that cross-border giving is really new. And that while there is recognition and growing momentum in this, very little work has been done in diaspora giving in Australia. And that's a real shame because, as I mentioned, the numbers earlier highlight the huge potential. And some say that it's a new army of philanthropists. So for us here at Myriad Australia, we recognise that these are the untapped donor communities, and we'll be engaging work shortly to really better understand how to unlock this potential. But it is really driving how the new modes of giving is moving away from the traditional giving. They're more interested in social enterprises, climate change initiatives, systemic changes. So it's really great to sort of see and support this new sort of generation of givers here.
Those are some eye-watering figures, Anita. I just have to like process that for a second. It's an incredible shift in less than a generation. And Dixon, I was in Singapore recently, and something similar is happening, but in its own Singaporean way, where so many of the young population have been educated abroad. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are on diaspora giving.
Thank you. So not just educating abroad, but bringing back a lot of activism and passion for causes that is very different from the first generation. So along with the wealth transfer, there are a lot of discussions on how to pivot if they have existing giving momentum set up by the first generation, how to pivot for the second. For the first generation, then a lot of thoughts going in on how to preserve what I have built up over the last 2 decades, 3 decades. And with those differences, some will converge and some will merge. Others will be kept separate. And we see this repeated families after families, looking at how to preserve the first generation's one without change, and yet allow the second generation to run and start something of their own. And the other key feature on the next gen is that it is no longer now tied to, for example, at home. So giving at home versus giving abroad. A lot of it is cost-based now. So the passion for causes becomes cost-based anywhere in the world that I can find the same needs. I would love to address it. So not necessarily saving the world, but addressing the cost wherever this cost may be it climate, animal causes, or children's health, or young early childhood education. It doesn't matter now on the geography. One final thing is this: because of the connectedness across the globe, some of them have now either families that are located elsewhere because the second gen educated there decides to grow roots there. They want then cross-border tax benefits. So that also comes into play for a global network like Myriad Alliance to be able to then enable this anywhere across the globe, where families can still participate jointly as a family foundation.
Thank you, Dixon. And I'm sure we'll touch on more about the growing role of Singapore and family foundations in particular. But Li Xing, China's diaspora is one of the largest in the world. I'm really intrigued as to the role of wealthy diaspora with Chinese heritage and the way perhaps they're working back in China.
Well, I think if we are talking about these diasporas, obviously that in China we don't have other foreign countries people living in China, so we are not talking about the foreign countries diaspora making contributions to a country like the US and UK. We can only talk about the opposite, right? So my focus would be on the Chinese diaspora, how they are making contributions to China. And for this part, I think it's very obvious, as you said just now, that the Chinese diasporas, most of them have the passion to contribute back to their homeland, which is China. And give Asia species as an example, we have been working with our donors, which who are actually the Chinese diasporas. They work with us since the day one that Gift Asia set up 24 years ago. And they've been contributing to the education system in China for 24 years through us. And such kind of cases in Gift Asia, we've now seeing quite a lot. We can see quite a lot, and I think they count for at least 10% our annual revenue when we're talking about Gift Asia's annual donation into China. So that's about roughly about 2 to 3 millions by all these kind of Chinese diasporas. That's the fund transfer, but there are actually other aspects happening by these Chinese diasporas, like Anita just talked about the cultural exchange. So these Chinese diasporas not only trying to save the money or do the fundraising for to support the development of their homeland, but they also wanted to see if there is some sort of a cultural exchange between the people still in their hometown and then the outside world. So recently that the Gift Asia have actually worked with several of these Chinese diaspora and then help them to build up the channel so that they can not only transfer their funds to support the development of their homeland, but also they wanted to this kind of cultural stuff, which is focusing on the Chinese culture and also focusing on do some research on the family root, so that these family members, especially the younger generations, can have a deeper understanding of their ancestor and then the current China. So that's I think this has become a quite popular kind of thing happening that Gift Asia can see recently.
Thank you, Li Xing. And something that all three of you actually have mentioned is this wealth transfer. And I'm really intrigued as to whether with that wealth transfer, there is a shift in thematic giving. So I've just seen in the chat, somebody mentioned mental health, for example. This is to all of you, but can you give me some examples of, because of this shift, there is not just a shift in who is the funder, but also what they are giving to, and perhaps pulling and pushing against previous cultural philanthropic trends? Any of you?
Sort of jump in quickly.
Yeah.
What we're seeing here at Myriad Australia are the younger generation really trying to support communities in conflict zones and moving away from the INGOs and really partnering with the grassroots organisations because they believe in the local leaders on the ground. They believe that's where impact will have its greatest strength and more lasting. Particularly that the organisation on the ground might not be a charitable organisation, but they believe in the work. And they believe it so much that they're still willing to contribute, but working with the intermediary to safeguard those funds. So really sort of channeling funds into harder to reach places where streamlined funding can have difficulty supporting.
Yeah, Dickson, do you have any thoughts on that as well?
I think on giving, at least for the succeeding generations, we are seeing more and more of the same but different. So health and education remains there, but approached differently. So education traditionally could be scholarships or bursaries. Today, it is recyclable scholarships. So innovation added in. For health, traditionally, it is really just treatment. Today, the younger generations is looking for alternatives, either to prevent if you can't cure or to delay. So there's a lot of new thoughts surrounding the same causes. But as for new causes, then climate is front and center and applied differently. Some are very big into conservation. Others are looking at replicable models overseas that can be applied to Asia, where there are higher concentrations of mangroves, for example. So climate in all sense of the word. Just one more unique to this generation, and that is they are no longer bound by geography. So if I want to understand about a cause, I don't wait for knowledge to come to me. I go looking for them. So they are prepared to hop on the plane, take off somewhere to learn. And that's the beauty of not just the internet, but of travels today, the convenience of that. And then linking up with similarly passionate kind of peers that are there, so that the support becomes global almost instantly, because they are looking at the same causes, the same impact that they are after, and therefore the same intervention. And what you have learned there, you quickly transfer to me so that I can up the game over at my territory here in Asia. So these are some trends that we are seeing.
And I'm thinking about the role of intermediaries here in all of this. Li Xing, what is the role of intermediaries with this kind of bringing in this globalized generation?
I think gift Asia is regarded as intermediate in the market, in the philanthropy sector. So I think what gift Asia can see is that currently in China, that there are more fundings going into climate change related issues, whereby in the past we have more fund going into some traditional areas such as education, poverty alleviation, etc. But recently I've been touched by quite a few foreign donors interested in the climate change issues. Because in China, actually, the climate change stuff is supported by China. So local charities, local NGOs, of course, that they try to see whether they can do something related to climate change and solving the issues by providing their kind of support, but not so popular among these Chinese NGOs, Chinese nonprofits. And so this thing is not so kind of not very popular that you can see in China. Only a few of them are doing this. But in the last 2 to 3 years, I can see that more and more overseas donors are trying to give support to Chinese, especially the grassroots NGOs going into this sector, and then trying to support these climate change areas, and then provide the some sort of a solution to the Chinese public through their support to Chinese NGOs. That is something that I'm now seeing recently. Yeah, that's the new trend in China.
Thank you, Li Xing. And I'm aware that we're talking about opportunities and growth here. But philanthropists in Asia have also faced significant barriers to giving. There are often complicated taxation laws and regulatory policies, limited availability of infrastructure to give and receive funding historically, as well as some practical challenges such as language or a lack of information on charities to support. How have how can some of these challenges be overcome? And would love to hear probably some examples of any solutions that you have found where you are, Anita.
Thanks, Shafi. And this flows on from your previous question about the role of intermediaries. And I think it's particularly important in the Australian market because international giving is still in its formative stages. So, as I mentioned at the start, the regulatory barriers only started to lift in 2017. So, our donors need the support. They need to build their capacity. They need a platform to get their tax deduction. So I'll go back to, what is the Myriad Alliance? It's that we're a global network made up of independent members, and we're each intermediaries in our own markets. We're united by a shared mission, and that's really to connect international donors to impactful nonprofits around the world. We exist really to navigate the complexities. So as you mentioned, Shafi, there's so many unknowns. So our role is to really, conduct the due diligence on the overseas organisations to ensure that they're reputable, the grantees are legally registered, and we help navigate the cultural nuances and the language barriers so we can establish partnerships for success at the very start. So we really do bridge the gap between countries, between donors, and we do this through this regional and international network that we've created. And as Dickson mentioned, this is really the beauty of the Myriad Alliance. We have, Australia is an island itself, and we are so close to Asia, and there is so much need there. But most often, more than not, a donor would come to me and say, "Hey, Anita, I really want to get my funding to China. How can I do that?" We understand that it's notoriously difficult to get funding in. So being part of this alliance, I can lean on the likes of Xing to leverage his knowledge to navigate that on behalf of the donor. And so they can safely facilitate their generosity through this network that we've built.
Thank you, Anita. Dickson, how are the challenges? How can they be overcome?
I think for just speaking from where I am, Southeast Asia comprises many, many small countries put together. So while as a territory, it may not look big, but complexity is right there because every country, different laws, different regulations, different rules. And because in today, a lot of spotlight is on Asia as the place where a lot of this development and therefore philanthropy is taking place. Governance is the biggest challenge today for a lot of donors, donors that we serve. So this is where the alliance come in strong on due diligence, and we exchange and we cross exchange a lot of this due diligence information about implementing partners that are on the ground. You can have very, very small NGOs that are locally registered in rural regions in Vietnam, in Laos, in Myanmar, in Cambodia, that is very hard to know them well. And this is where you require a lot of on-site support. And this is where our networks then expanded out and then all fed back to the alliance so that we can then exercise the same due diligence for any donors across the globe. So as we learn from cross-border giving, the needs on the ground that are unique to each country and each community, even for some of these that are at play, and to navigate them and then to pass it on to donors. that becomes a critical role that we have been playing, at least for the last decade, building up a lot of this ground knowledge so that we can then keep giving safe and keep giving done well, and from a fiduciary standpoint to manage it and govern it well.
Xing, do you see parallels with what Dickson has been saying in or Give to Asia in China?
I must say that it is not parallel. It is actually that we are connected. So, for example, I'm connected with Anita. Some of his business that she mentioned that perhaps the Chinese diaspora wants to make a contribution to China, and then I will have to work very closely with Anita on that aspect. And talking about Southeast Asia, I know that quite a few Chinese entities, be it like universities or companies, they wanted to get some kind of donations in Southeast Asia, and then wanted to understand how they can set up and how they can set up the entity, or how they can then move the money back to China, etc. And I think this kind of stuff can be actually solved by the help of the entities, organizations like Dixon's Temasek Trust, which is a very good name in China. And I also was told that some of our partners in China are talking to like Temasek Trust Advisory as well. So I think in the future, if really currently, I think the Chinese companies or organizations going abroad, the number is still small, but I can foresee that as China's economy in the future will become bigger, and then especially the overseas activities will become more and more. And at that point, there will be more this kind of demands from Chinese companies or entities. And at that point, I think my connection with Myriad Australia, with Temasek Trust Advisory, will be very vital to these organizations, because like what is described, that when you're talking about doing philanthropy in Laos, in Cambodia, in Vietnam, if you want to do it by yourself, then you quite possibly get into trap, get into big trouble. But with the help like Gift Asia and Temasek Trust, because we actually do our business in our normally or daily on the basis that with this kind of local angels, so we know them in and out. We know their performance, we know their people, we know what kind of result outcome they can bring. So we have the confidence, if we have a cause, we have a cause to work with the selected partners in the local basis. So I think in the future, at least for the Chinese organizations, intermediaries like Temasek Trust Advisory, Gift Asia, Myriad Australia would play actually a very important role. That's for the cross-border Chinese going abroad. But on the other hand, I've also talked about the opposite way, that overseas donations in China. For this part, I think Gift Asia is very good at this, because we have been doing this since 2001. And so nearly 25 half quarter century. And especially that since 2017, when that ONG law came into effect, Gift Asia got the license from Chinese government, and then since then we accumulate a lot of kind of experience in terms of how to help and facilitate overseas donations into China. So when you're talking about make grant into China, if I'm saying that go to Gift Asia, that would be a right choice. Currently, we are the #1 ONG law set up in China in terms of the project numbers. And then our business has been grown up from 6 to 7 million USD before 2019 to now to the level like 20 to 30 million each year. So that is actually a recognition by our partners, both in China and outside China. But of course, but also we can see that the recognition from the Chinese government, the department as well, because without knowing how to make this kind of overseas donations in China, by working closely and properly with the regulators, then you will easily get into some big issues as well. Shafi.
Thank you, Xing. I think what underpins what all of you've been saying is trust. And I know that the Myriad network that's at the heart of the Myriad network is trust and enabling donors to give with that level of trust. And I think that's probably more needed than ever before, particularly this year of all years, where we've seen significant shifts, including geopolitical shifts and the collapse of, for example, USAID in the US. Anita, I'm wondering, has that had a significant impact on where donors facilitate their resources where you are?
I guess, Shafi, from our perspective at Myriad Australia, the collapse of the USAID has just really highlighted how important trusted and reliable channels are for cross-border giving. Again, going back to trust, we are seeing many Aussie donors sort of move away from the larger INGOs. And they're looking for ways to directly support local organisations across Asia and beyond. And this sort of feeds into the growing momentum for cross-border giving, with more donors really starting to explore cross-border giving for the first time or build on their existing giving to really include overseas communities. But this is most definitely part of that growing momentum and what's really driving Australia to look outside our borders.
Dickson, are you seeing this momentum as well in Singapore post USAID?
I think, if anything, it heightens the awareness of these needs, given that now there is a void, a vacuum to be filled. It mobilizes the funds even more. It mobilizes Asia giving to Asia. That's a big consideration now for many, especially where in the past, we are talking about a generation ago, a lot of support for the region goes actually out to the West and then gets redeployed back in Asia. And it's a function of wealth. So now with Asia having its own wealth now, there's a lot of very specific requests. I'm happy to support, but I don't want my support to go all the way to US and then back. It just doesn't make sense. All the more if when it goes off, it gets a cut and then it comes back slightly short of the funds that I've committed. So I want everything to go to Asia, and I want it to stay in Asia for Asia. And that itself, with the momentum that we are seeing now, it just catalyzes a lot of this Asian support just for Asia.
Yeah, and I see Xing nodding his head when Dickson said Asia for Asia.
Because Asia to Asia means that there is no kind of a negative impact on the USAID thing, right? I know that Singaporean or Singaporean NGOs, they don't like their fund go through US and then to other countries like China. So we are trying to solve that issue through a kind of new solution, which we are now working on. And but I would like to talk this kind of thing from Gift Asia's perspective, because Gift Asia is actually a U.S. entity, U.S. Charity, and so when the U.S. AID stuff happened, we were asked by many of our partners, both in the US and in China, asking us whether we get hit by this kind of stuff. But the reality is that the Gift Asia itself is not hit, because Gift Asia has been put something into our in principle into our business, that we will only touch the private philanthropy, and we will only accept the funds from the private. We will never accept the any funds from any country's government. So, and this statement is actually put on our website. So we never accept any kind of governments, even indirectly. So when we accepted some big funders, big foundations, which has a quite close kind of connection with the US government, when they give us the fund, we will check with them whether there's any some kind of fund coming from the US support, government support, and we will only work with them when we get the positive answer saying that, okay, this one is only coming from the non-government support. So of course that we are now seeing some sort of impact among our donors, because some of the donors, they normally, or they in the past, they get some the US government support, including receiving the funding from the US government, including USAID. But their support to China among our donors, I don't see much kind of a decline, to be honest. Initially, we were thinking there would be quite a lot of this kind of negative impact among our donors. But up till now, there are only 1 to 2 our existing donors telling us that they might have to shift their focus from China to other places. So, which is actually quite a small number compared to our current portfolio. And so we don't see, in that case, that the kind of negative impact from this kind of a US AID stuff to Gift Asia is really quite small, to be honest.
Thank you, Xing. Clearly, there's a lot of resilience happening in Asia right now. I'm wary of the time. I know we started late, so we probably still have about 6 minutes left. So I'm going to go to the Q&As. Please, if you're still on the call and you want to have a question thrown at our panelists, please do pop it in the box now. We have a question specifically for Anita has come in from Priscilla. Thank you, Priscilla, for sharing this. Priscilla says, has there been any challenges for donations where grassroots organizations are not set up as charities and hence may possibly face some regulatory restrictions in how funds are received?
Question, Priscilla. It really depends on where your organization is registered. While you might not need to be a charity, we do request that any grantee in receipt of funding from Myriad Australia must be registered with a government body. So that way it allows us to ensure that you are adhering to local law, being transparent in your reporting, and legally registered. From there, we can work with you to really safeguard those funds to provide the assurance to our donor in Australia. We are also at Myriad Australia bound by our local laws to ensure that the grantee overseas receiving the funds can safely, I guess, protect the donation or can safeguard it, and can apply those funds to charitable causes. So yes, it really depends if your local law allows you to receive foreign funding, and we can work with you to determine how we can get those funds to you.
Thanks, Anita. Priscilla, I hope Anita answered your question. We have a question from Havovi. Apologies if I've pronounced your name wrong. They say, I'm curious also whether the speakers think there's openness among individual donors to think about Asia as a region and support across countries on an issue. Dickson.
I think I've mentioned earlier on, especially the younger generation looking at causes rather than geography. So as a fact, then it means that if I'm addressing early childhood, and if I'm Asian and I'm looking at early childhood issues across Asia, in all likelihood, you're going to hit quite a few countries all at the same time. And the beauty of then the implementing partners is that they are likely also to be present in many of these countries, so more than one. So effectively, we are looking at one solution, one partner, but multiple sites. And that tends to be the kind of programs that we curate so that we achieve the impact in one go. So yes, definitely an interest and a desire to see impact in across geography, but more because of the passion to support a single cause or a single type of program that each donor is looking at, and then seeing it applicable right away on a few territories and say, let's do it. Let's see all of them benefit at the same time.
And final question I'll throw to Li Xing. Somebody says, I wonder what the interest level among new philanthropy is in working from a more trust-based perspective instead of an outcome framework. And also they comments with the understanding of something like climate or gender, that they don't have short-term outcomes. Li Xing, what is the interest among new philanthropists on this trust-based perspective?
If I understand the questions correctly, and then from my perspective, my answer should be focusing on the some new philanthropists thinking about how to bring the new kind of flavors to the current philanthropy sector in China or in Asia. Is that kind of a question?
Yeah, I think what they're talking about is approaching with a long-term solutions, multi-year, in a way that, for example, climate crisis, climate resilience, and not thinking in a short-term kind of basis. Is that happening in China where funders are working in such a way as to work with on the ground nonprofits with a long-term mindset?
Okay, I think quite a few the bigger donors and then the individual philanthropists would like to see this kind of thing happening in their field. That once they wanted to dip into one area, then they want to find trusted partners and then implement the philanthropic activities surrounding that thing for a longer time rather than for a short period of time and then find another partner for another thing. So yes, I think that's kind of thing happening now in China, especially for the current neo philanthropist.
Thank you. Any thoughts before we finish, Anita and Dickson, on that? I know we've come to the end of our session. I really want to thank our panelists, Anita, Xing, and Dickson, for taking their time out, especially in a later time zone. So it's time for them to go. But thank you, everybody, for joining. And please do give Alliance Magazine and Myriad a follow on Instagram or any kind of social media platform that you use in your region. And please keep the conversation up. We look forward to hearing from you. Until then, thank you so much for all of you for joining. Take care.